Alright, we're going to run across this again with some 1500. This time we're just going to do it with our hand without a block. Actually, I usually just take and fold the paper over in threes and go about my business. This part right here, most painters hate it. I don't really mind the wet sanding and buffing part of it. My biggest thing of that I hate masking off, and I hate sanding down a car that's got OEM paint on top of it for some reason. Can't stand sanding top coat for some reason. You can use a spray bottle if you want, or a lot of people use a sponge and squeeze it. I just dip it into the bucket. I'm really surprised how popular these square body trucks are getting. I guess when you grow up and that's all you ever rode around in and stuff, you just consider them an old truck. But now their prices are almost to the moon. If any of you guys out there got some great tips and tricks for wet sanding and buffing, just leave it in the comments below. Don't be afraid to share your wisdom. All this stuff is kind of a dying art. I know when I was growing up, you go to 3 different shops in a weekend and they'd all be 15, 20 people at every shop. Now, you go to a shop, you'd be lucky to be 3 or 4 people there. And that's at one shop. Once you feel that the paper is sliding over your panel with minimal drag, pretty much will know that you're ready to change to the next smoother paper. This is a piece of 2000. Usually the first cut takes the longest. The next two cuts go rather quickly. You don't want to. The more time you spend wet sanding, the less time you got to buff. If you sand out real good with the 2500, you know it'll buff up really fast for you. You could actually, if you wanted to, buff it after just the 1500 process, but it kind of struggles to get it to get all the scratch out and get a nice clean look and shine to it. So I'd rather wet sand it and make the buff go easy, because the buffer, you can mess up real fast with it if you're not careful and ruin the panel and have to be back in putting some clear or maybe even repainting it. We'll say this, nothing's quite as satisfying as whenever you get it all done, get it buffed up, waxed up, and you can look at it and smile and see yourself clearly. That right there is very satisfying. The name of the game here is to get it as smooth as possible with taking off as little material as possible. I always put on 3 coats of clear. You put that much clear on it, you can do quite a bit of cutting before you'll get yourself into trouble. I know a lot of times you hear about people putting 16, 20 coats of clear on something. That's all BS. If you do that, I'll make a video and show you what ends up happening, especially if you do it all in one round. If you're really wanting it to look super deep and super rich, the best way to go about it is to base it out, put 2 coats of clear on it, come back, hit it with some 600, and then put 2 more coats of clear on it. You start stacking 5, 6, 12 coats of clear on it. You know, all that stuff shrinks over time. It'll be nothing but problems. I guess if you could probably put as many as 6 coats of clear if you got on it and cut a lot of it off, but to me that's more work than you need to go about doing. Not only that, it'd be really expensive. Most clear coats are very high. Decent clear coat's about $500 a gallon for the clear and the hardener. There's some cheaper clears out there that do good jobs, and they're usually in the ballpark of $250 or so for a spray setup. Show you guys what we got going on. See how we got it all nice and smooth and no shiny stuff poking through now? That's what we're after. You know, we'll let this dry off pretty good and come back and clean it up with some 2500 and then buff them up and see what we got. I will be back with you in a minute. Okay guys, we're going to go ahead and finish this off with some 2500. This right here, you're really not doing a whole lot of cutting. The main purpose of the 2500 is just to refine the scratches down even more, to make it the buffing a lot easier. Like I say, you can sand it any way you want to, just make sure you're always just changing it up a little bit. That way you don't cut a groove, basically. It's just like if you drive your truck in your yard in the same exact pass every single time, it'll cut a rut. That's basically the same thing the sandpaper will do. It'll end up cutting a rut. So as long as you always change it up a little bit, you'll be fine. And to be honest with you, if you happen to do it the other way, 99 out of 100 people won't notice it. It's just one of those things that once you start doing this kind of work, you'll see it and you'll be like, well, I just want to make it a little bit better, a little bit better. You always just want to refine your process to where you're making it the best you possibly can. And like I say, if you're just now getting started, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, but that's how we learn. If we get it right the first time, every single time, we won't never learn nothing. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just learn from them and go from there. I know the first paint job I did, it turned out, it's kind of weird. It was a purple that I wanted to be blue. That's the first thing that was kind of messed up. It was a metallic paint job, and luckily I didn't have no problems with stripes or anything, but the clear coat it did not turn out for me. It was pretty rough. It was so bad I took 320 to it, sanded it smooth, and that's how I knew that 600 is about the most aggressive you can get with and get it to buff back out. But I learned a lot on that car, and the next one turned out better, and then one after that was even better, and just as long as you learn from each one, try to make each one even better. That's the great thing about base coat, clear coat. You can work it a lot after the fact, after you paint it. A single stage isn't as forgiving. I hear a lot of people talk about, oh, base coat, clear coat it's tricky, it's tricky. It's not. It's 2 extra coats or 3 extra coats of spraying usually, and then after the fact, it's so much easier to work with. And chances are, if you can spray a single stage and lay it out pretty nice, you're not going to have no problem with clear coat, because they're pretty similar. If you are just getting started, I'd recommend a great beginner paint is Kirker. It's inexpensive. You can get good results out of it. It holds up pretty decent. They got a wide variety of colors. So I would go get me some of that, an old beat box. Sand it up, paint it, see what happens. You might surprise yourself. A good habit to get into is to wiping your panel off after. You see how all that white residue is on there? This has been painted for a couple weeks, but say if I painted it yesterday and I'm in here wet sanding it today, that residue will actually a lot of times, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of reacts or basically becomes wet again, and it'll kind of etch itself in. So it's not so bad right here that because you're gonna be wet sanding it out and buffing it, but like your areas up in here and your crannies and stuff, it'll get in there and it'll look bad. So it's just good practice to wipe it down, have it all cleaned up, and then that way you don't run into them issues. I learned that one on my first paint job. All right, we're gonna let this dry up, and then we'll come back and get to the buffing. When you guys get to the buffing process, you're going to have a couple different pad options. You got like a wool style pad, and then you got a foam style pad. The biggest thing is just like your first process is going to be compounding or rubbing compound. You can use either one of these two. Just want to make sure that your pad is for compounding, because there's one for compounding and then there's one that's for polishing, and they're usually marked on the back what they're for. And basically what it is the pores, like on the foam right here, these are wider to where these are finer, and it just refines the scratch even more to where you basically just get the scratch so small that it's physically impossible to see with the naked eye. The wool pad, it's pretty aggressive. I try to not use it because it's pretty good about burning through on corners. So I always try to stick with the foam pad, but there is instances where you can use the wool pad. And I think they got a new style wool pad out that's really killer. I haven't tried one yet, but I've been wanting to get one. Next time I'm at the paint store, I'll grab one and give it a shot and let you guys know about it. But for the biggest part, I just stick with a compounding foam pad, and then I move on to a polishing foam pad, and then I finish out with a little hand DA. But that's usually at the very end after the car's been all put together and everything like that. Just on the final detail job to really bring the shine out. Alrighty, hope this helps. Okay guys, we're to the point where it's time to buff. You want to do the same thing here. You just want to make sure your panel's good and clean. You ain't got no trash or debris or dust laying on top of it. The compound we're going to use is this 3D Extra Cut. They don't sponsor me or anything, but I will say it works really good, and if a product works, I'll give it its credit, and if it doesn't work, I'll let you know that too. The buffer, it's another thing you want to make sure you take really good care of. You never want to take and lay your buffer down on its pad, because you're going to lay it down on some contamination. So always leave it laid face up. And if you're not using it, I usually take my pad off and put it in a plastic bag, because you never know what all's floating around in the air. Especially around here, we do metal fab, we do all kinds of stuff, so it's good practice to leave it wrapped in plastic and good and clean until you need it. A couple things about the buffer. We know that it spins in this direction, so as you're buffing, you want to always make sure you're buffing off of the panel. You don't want to be buffing into the panel. So what that does is that it tends to build a lot of heat and it'll rub the paint off. So you want to make sure you're always buffing off the panel. Anytime you got an area like this where the side of the buffer might come in contact with something else, make sure you tape it off, because the side of the buffer is very abrasive because it doesn't have all the compound and stuff in it to make it a little bit smoother. So I just tape it off. That way if it happens to nudge up against it, it's no big deal. This area right here is a little bit more tricky, but say if we was buffing this area right here, the number one thing that most beginners do wrong is they'll have that buffer cocked on the corner like that. You want to lay your buffer as flat as possible. That's how you'll get maximum efficiency out of it. I know there is times, like say you're trying to get up here in this corner right here, you're going to have to get it up on its corner a little bit. That's okay. But as far as the flats, try to keep that buffer as flat as possible. Another thing is, I hear a lot of old wives' tales about they'll be buffing on it so hard to be standing on the buffer. I don't really recommend doing that. My philosophy is you want to keep it as cold as possible and the least amount of pressure as possible, and just get the scratch cleaned up and off of there. A lot of people say when you get the paint good and hot, you know, it smooths out and looks awesome. But the way I look at it, when you get paint hot, it's like a glue. It releases, you know. I don't know. It don't make a lot of sense to me to get the panel so hot that you can't hardly touch it. I usually try to get it to where I call it a cold buff. I try not to get any heat in the panel at all. I just try to get it shined up and then go from there. But that's me, and I'm self-taught. Maybe someone out there knows a little bit better. We're going to go ahead and you don't have to get too crazy with the compound. I just put a little bit on there. Well, I tried to put a little bit on there. Resist the urge just to get in there and crank it down. Take and kind of work it in a little bit. That'll keep it from throwing compound everywhere. You're still going to get it a little bit, but if you was just to put it on there with a big wet glob, it'd have it slung all over the walls, all over you, everywhere. I start a little slow, work it in there just a little bit. Just run over it 2 or 3 passes. It's kind of the same way as sanding. You just don't want to go back and forth like that. You want to try to mix it up a little bit too. You more do it on this process like that just to avoid missing a spot. You tend to run in basically a rut. I would say you tend to run the same rut and you might miss a small streak or something, whereas if you're coming back this way, you'll catch it. You want to take a clean clean rag and wipe off the compound. And there we go. There is one more step after this. You go ahead and polish it up. It'll make it even, the shine even more deeper. But like I say, I usually like to let it sit a week after I wet sand to do that process, just because it's going to die back a little bit. It'll save you a little bit of time and headache. Well, I hope this video was helpful for everybody. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the section below. Thanks for watching.